Well, good evening, Brevard County. This is an excited crowd. There's a lot of energy in this room. So let's see if I can put this there. Will that work? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is another return visit for me. Some of you may have joined us the other night for the Ronald Reagan Club at Jimmy's, and so it's great to see you again. And as I have already been told, is that the Ronald Reagan Club might not be as conservative as this club. No, I'm teasing. It's great. It is great to be back. My wife, unfortunately, could not be with us tonight, and I know that a lot of people had come just to see her again and have some time to spend with her. But as most of you know, we've been traveling the state together. She's back home right now in Palm Beach County, and it's great to see familiar faces. And I do just have to say a point of personal privilege here to say hi to Dorothy, who left Boca Raton several years ago and moved to Brevard County. What she knows now is what I've known all along, is that it's a whole heck of a lot more hospitable for conservatives here in Brevard County than it is in Palm Beach County. And I can tell you this, I did not have a 5-year plan like most politicians do to run for the United States Senate. This was not something that I have been charting a course for my entire life. This is something that, just like each and every one of you, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm concerned about the future direction of the country, and that's why I announced just last week that I am running for the United States Senate against Bill Nelson. I have been able to travel this state now for the past month and a half, and corner to corner, and meet some great people. Just the other night, and I have to tell you, when I was here in Brevard County, I saw a woman who was wearing a t-shirt that was for the 2012 presidential ticket of Galt Taggart. And I thought to myself, that's a ticket. That's a ticket that I can vote for. And as I told the folks who were there the other night, that one of the reasons I married my wife, and it will be our 5-year anniversary later this month, is that when I went into her apartment for the first time to pick her up, she actually had a copy of Atlas Shrugged on her bookshelf. So that to me was a sign for sure. And so, but when you think about what that t-shirt represents, you start to realize the predicament that we're in here as a country. And you start to realize that everyone shares that same concern and that same fear that America is truly headed off the cliff if we don't do something very, very soon and very, very meaningful. I had just the other day the opportunity to go down to Miami. And I spent the time with a much smaller group of people, but there was a couple in this room who were Russian immigrants who have been in this country now for nearly 30 years. Small business owners, conservative Republicans, and they looked at me and they said, "What is wrong with this country? What are we doing? How are we allowing this to happen here?" And so I am so privileged and so fortunate to be able to travel the state, to meet so many great people, to hear these stories, and to be so inspired to fight and do what needs to be done in order to get our country headed back in the right direction. Because I think everyone in this room recognizes that the problems that we face today, the challenges that we face today, aren't just because of the Democrats. The Republicans share in the blame for many of the problems that we face here in our country. And right now, I think everyone shares that same concern and that same fear. And while last night, and I do just have to briefly comment on this, it was somewhat of a morale booster, somewhat of a positive shot in the arm for us last night to see the announcement, or to hear the announcement of Osama bin Laden being killed by our men and women, military, and our intelligence operations. And I just think it's one of those days where we can just say thank you to those men and women who serve our country with such honor and respect. Now is not the time for us to stand back. Now is the time for us to continue to be vigilant. There are some even today who are calling for, after the announcement of bin Laden's death, that the war on terror is over. That we can all of a sudden think that the world now is safe. We understand that it's not. But there are people who do not share our beliefs right now, that we are in a civilizational struggle. That there is evil in the world who seeks to destroy us. That's why we must continue to be vigilant. That's why this can only be the end of the beginning and not the beginning of the end. And it is so imperative for us to keep that pressing in our minds. And I think as we realize, beyond just that one announcement, all of the other things that we've been so focused on, we recognize right now the economic crisis that we're facing in this country. I know everyone, every single day, talking about the issues of gas prices and the fear of inflation, the deficits that continue to mount, the debt that is just looming over us. Those are the issues that are on the forefront, because if we can't solve those problems, we cannot get our economy going again. We cannot create that economic opportunity, that economic freedom. And I think we all recognize, and that's why you're here tonight. Finally, America is awake. People are paying attention. When I go to the 9/12 groups, and when I go to the Tea Parties and the other constitutional groups that have formed out there, I am so excited. Because for the first time, I really feel like people are energized like never before, and they're saying, enough is enough. We want our leaders to tell it like it is, and if they're not going to get the job done, then we're going to find somebody else who will. Yep. And that is because we recognize that Washington, D.C. and the politicians who have been there for so long are failing us. They're failing our country. They're failing future generations. And in 2010, we sent a message by sending up limited government conservatives to Washington. But one thing we figured out very quickly is there aren't enough of them up there. In 2012, we need to send reinforcements to Washington, D.C. to continue the job. People who are willing to fight, people who are unapologetic, people who are not only going to challenge Democrats on spending and taxes and the debt, but Republicans who are also going to challenge those in our own party to stand firm on the principles that we believe in and that we know are the right thing to do for the future of this country. And I know a little bit of something about that. Because when I was appointed and selected to serve as the majority leader of the Florida House of Representatives by then Speaker of the House Marco Rubio, it was then that Charlie Crist was Florida's governor. And it was Charlie Crist who was from day one driving the Republican Party to the middle, talking about more moderation, that we can win elections if we're just a little bit more bipartisan, that the best way to beat the Democrats was to join them. And I stood up and I said, no, Republicans don't need to be less partisan. Republicans need to be more principled. And that's what we need today. That's part of the fight that we need today. Because the future of our country hangs in the balance right now. I think we all understand that. I think we all recognize what we're facing. And we don't have a long time to be able to resolve these issues. The time frame is running very, very short. I know that on so many of your minds it's no longer just about what type of America are we going to pass along for our children and our grandchildren to inherit. It's now also concern about today, about current times, about what type of America are we going to live in. And so this is real, this is pressing. And we're seeing it first and foremost as it relates to the economic mess in this country. The fiscal crisis that exists in Washington is self-imposed. And I think Matt would agree with me when I talk about Abraham Lincoln. And the fact that Abraham Lincoln once said that America is too strong to be destroyed by outside forces. But if we fail, it will be because we falter from within. We have now spent ourselves into a point of no return if we are not able to get it under control. We are bankrupting this country fiscally and morally. And it's quite simple. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to understand that we are just simply spending money we don't have in Washington, D.C. And then we just realized just this past month that Republicans in Washington began the victory lap tour after cutting only $38 billion from this year's fiscal budget. We're going to borrow more in 10 days than what we agreed to cut in this year's budget. That's not what was promised. That's not what needs to be done. We know that if we cannot do the small things, if we can't cut funding for National Public Radio and Planned Parenthood, how do we expect that we are going to stand firm on the challenges, the big looming challenges of the day, when it relates to cutting discretionary spending, when it relates to the 2012 budget and entitlement reform? How are we going to be able to not raise the debt ceiling? If we are not able to do the small things, we will not be able to do the big things. And that's the big fight right now, the line in the sand issue. And I have been very clear on this. Republicans cannot vote to increase the debt ceiling. We are like a family right now who has maxed out their credit card, who instead of sitting down at the kitchen table and talking about what can we do in order to cut our spending, in order to pay down our debt, instead is trying to get on the phone with that credit card company and say, even though we haven't made good on our promise to pay, even though we haven't done anything to pay down our debt, would you mind just raising our credit limit just one more time? Because what you're seeing in Washington right now is this conversation about all the different things that need to be tied to a debt ceiling increase. I haven't heard any specifics yet that are going to actually begin the tough process of cutting spending, of reforming entitlements, and actually starting to attack the debt. Until we actually see concrete plans, Republicans need to stand firm that we are not going to raise the debt ceiling, because if we do it one more time, that is what's going to lead to more economic catastrophe. That is what I fear more so than some of the Chicken Little sky is falling rhetoric from the Democrats and from this administration saying that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, America is going to default. We can't allow that rhetoric to dictate the policy in Washington, because we are so close to driving our economy right off of the cliff. These are the challenges that we're facing right now, but it's not just, there's so much focus on the fiscal concerns of this country and on the fiscal crisis that we're facing. But our $14 trillion national debt is now also our nation's greatest national security threat, because we are borrowing money from foreign countries that do not share our values and interests. And every time we are not able to act on the global stage to take that moral leadership, we lose our sovereignty bit by bit. We lose our independence because we're not able to act in that belief that America is safer when America is stronger. We also lose our independence. We also lose our independence because we are so dependent on foreign countries for our sources of energy. We need an energy policy here in this country to drill domestically off the coast of Florida, to drill in Anwar, and to drill for shale technology to extract oil and natural gas. I'm the only one in this race who has never supported cap and trade. I don't believe in those policies. But the reason right now why I'm so concerned about America's foreign policy is because we have a White House, we have an administration that believes that it is better for America to fit in with the rest of the world than it is for America to lead it. And you heard just the other day this administration's foreign policy being described as leading from behind. That's outrageous. Now, fortunately, just in yesterday's actions, we saw some demonstration of leadership. But the question is where will they go from here? What will be next for this administration on the foreign policy front? Are they going to stand firm in the face of terror, in the face of the threats that challenge us? Or are they now going to say, as some on the left are already beginning to say, that the war on terror is over, that it is time to bring our troops home. I think everyone recognizes as well that we cannot fight an enemy unless we are willing to admit that an enemy even exists. And that enemy has a name. That enemy has a name and it has a mission, and it is Sharia-compliant Islam. And it is not only a threat on foreign soil, it is a threat from those here in our own country who seek to destroy us from within. And we cannot allow political correctness or multiculturalism or appeasement cripple our defenses at home or abroad, because Sharia law is not consistent with the tenets and principles of the United States Constitution. These are unpopular issues to talk about. It's not popular to talk about the need to reform Medicare. It's not popular to talk about the threats of Sharia-compliant Islam and the threats that radical Islam poses to us. I can tell you this, I know a little bit about not being very popular. Because as I said earlier, I come from Palm Beach County, where it's not very popular to be a pro-life, pro-gun, conservative Republican. But what I didn't tell you is that I'm the son of two Brooklyn-born, former public school teacher, liberal Democrats. But I registered as a Republican. I registered as a Republican when I turned 18 years old because I believe in what Ronald Reagan embodied. I grew up there during that era. I remember the 1970s, and there's so many analogies and so many similarities to today during that Jimmy Carter administration. But I remember what it was like to feel proud to be an American, what it was like to be a part of that can-do American spirit, that belief that America is safer when America is stronger. That's why I registered as a Republican. That's why I have fought for those principles my entire life, even when it wasn't popular, even when it wasn't easy. And that's why I think today it's so important for us to remember that we can't separate those principles and those pillars that Ronald Reagan stood for. Our economic prosperity, our strong national security, and our foundational Judeo-Christian principles. We recognize that now is not the time for a truce on the so-called social issues. Because we could address our nation's fiscal woes. We can address our national security threats. But if we do it while remaining silent on the importance of the sanctity of life or the institution of marriage between one man and one woman, then we would still be a bankrupt nation. And some people believe that there's no connection between our social woes and our economic woes. But we watch the deterioration of this country's culture, this country's moral values. That's what's led with the breakdown of the family. That's what's led to the dependency society that has grown up around us. This over-reliance on government to try to cure these problems. And every time that government continues to grow and continues to expand, we lose those very individual freedoms that we cherish and hold so dearly. We understand and we recognize that America's exceptionalism is based on the spirit of the individual, not the power of the state. That's why we're fighting. That's why each and every one of you, whether you have been engaged in the political process before 2010 or not, that's why you're here tonight. Because we feel America slipping through our fingers. We feel that promise leaving us. We feel that opportunity no longer possible for today and for future generations. That's why this is so important. That's why we have to have change in Washington, D.C., and we will not be able to get our country back on the right track until we get back control of the United States Senate and make Barack Obama a one-term president. Now, coming to Brevard County, I think you all know a little bit about Bill Nelson. Bill Nelson is somebody who has benefited for years politically by going into one room and saying one thing and going into another room and saying something else. He even likes to tell people that he's a moderate Democrat or a blue dog Democrat. And I think he even tells people that he went into outer space on the shuttle program. But I think everyone in this room knows what he's actually done on Earth.
Yeah.
And that has been supporting the stimulus, supporting the bailouts, and Obamacare, and cap and trade, and card check, and the policies that are taking our country in the wrong direction. We need a United States Senator that is going to fight for Florida and for our country, and not for the Obama agenda. That's why it's time. That's why it's time right now for new leadership in Washington, D.C. And this is a choice. If you don't believe that our country is on the precipice of going right off of the cliff, then I'm not your candidate. Then I'm not your candidate. You can find somebody else. But if you believe that we are challenged now more than ever, and we need the vigilance, we need the courage, we need the perseverance to get through these difficult times, that we need a fighter, somebody who has fought tirelessly for these principles, then join our movement. Be a part of Adam Hasner's campaign, because it's not just about me, it's about us. It's about what we need to do to get our country back in the right direction. Go to adamhasner.com. Make a contribution so that we can get our message out. Be a part of that conversation on Facebook and Twitter so that we can continue to educate more people about the challenges that we face today and the limited government solutions for tomorrow to get this country headed back in the right direction. And I know, coming to Brevard County, I know that this is not going to be an easy campaign. I recognize the challenges that I face in the Republican primary against better funded candidates who are in positions of higher power right now. But I believe that there's something more important to a campaign than money. And I know that this isn't going to be easy, but I can tell you this, there is nothing more important. And I promise you, I will fight every single day to restore the promise of America for today's generation and for the future. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to This is the part that I've been waiting for. I should have just fast forwarded directly to the questions.
Questions and answers. This is your chance.
This is it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I kind of hate to shoot from the dark here since you may not have had a chance to look at this yet with so many other issues out there. But have you looked at the 17th Amendment, and if so, where are you on it?
I do not support repealing the 17th Amendment.
Why not, may I ask? Absent the 17th
Sure.
Amendment, unfunded mandates would
Sure.
not have a chance.
Sure, and I respect your view on this. I think there right now are other issues that are much more pressing that we need to tackle, and the amount of time that it is going to take to pass a constitutional amendment out of Washington with 2/3 of the House and the Senate and get 38 states to ratify it, I think it will actually be a distraction from attacking the debt, from cutting spending, from getting that under control. And for the other part too, as I served in the legislature in Tallahassee, I'm not so sure I trust those guys to appoint our United States senators. Yes, sir.
Have you had an opportunity to look at Paul Ryan's 2012 budget? And if so, what are your thoughts?
Let me just say this. I don't think it goes far enough. I think it's a step in the right direction. I have taken a look at that. I've also started to look into the Republican Study Committee budget, which was much more aggressive in reducing the debt over a 10-year period. But I think, again, the Ryan budget begins that process and begins that conversation. But I think we have so much farther to go in terms of actually making the spending cuts that we need to make to balance the budget in order to bring down the debt and address the issues as it relates to growing our economy. Because it's not just a one-sided of the equation where you can only cut spending and get us back into prosperity. The part of the Ryan plan that I do agree more with are the tax cuts, the lowering of the tax rates, making it a more flat tax system, a more fair tax system, eliminating the deductions. That will be more helpful in terms of bringing jobs back, I believe, to this country and creating the economic growth that we're going to need to have. So again, it's the beginning of the debate. The one thing, though, I would say is that the Republican Party does a horrible job of being on offense. When I was the majority leader of the Florida House of Representatives, one of the things that I prided our operation in was the fact that we were going to define what the debate was going to be over. We were going to define the issues that we were going to discuss, as opposed to allowing the Democrats to define them, as opposed to allowing the media to define them. We're already playing defense in Washington, D.C. right now. How's the debate being formed? Tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. We lose when it's framed that way. Throwing grandma in the street. We lose when it's that way. Ending Medicare as we know it. We lose. We need to be on offense. That's something that I've demonstrated. It's that, I guess, it's that part of the Brooklyn blood in me. Even though I didn't live there very long, I moved to Florida when I was 7. That's the part that we need to be on offense, and we need to be aggressive. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about going on offense regarding stopping illegal immigration into this country? Because my feeling is that it's just as big a problem, and it can bring this country down just as quickly as defaulting on the debt.
First, let me just tell you, I do not support amnesty or amnesty-like policies in any way, shape, or form. I have talked about this no matter where I go, and my message is the same, whether I'm in Palm Beach County, Miami, or in the Panhandle. You will always hear the same thing from me no matter what group of people I am talking to. I support 100% border enforcement first, and no types of incentives like the DREAM Act or in-state college tuition. When I was in the legislature, I voted against in-state college tuition for illegals and children of illegals. I voted against health care benefits for illegals and children of illegals. I agree with you. We're seeing a deterioration from our loss of borders, from our culture, from our language, and that is part of the decline that we're seeing in our country right now. And we cannot begin to solve these problems with some type of quote-unquote comprehensive reform. We need to secure our borders, because it is not just any longer an economic issue, it's also a security issue. Because we have seen documented instances now of Hezbollah operatives coming across our porous borders, and they're now here in our country. That is a major national security threat for us, and I think that it's also a moral issue, because you can't have a system that allows people to come into this country illegally when we have another system that tells people to wait in line and play by the rules. And we can't have a system that says you can decide which laws we want or you want to abide by. We have to be a nation of laws, and we have to start enforcing the laws that are currently on the books. Yes, sir.
You indicated earlier that you're supportive of a balanced budget amendment, correct?
Correct.
Senator Herodopoulos, about a week ago, came out and said, yes, he's supportive of that, and he would like to have a constitutional convention to consider. Would you consider that?
Let me address this. I learned my lesson on that issue last year. I got a phone call from Phyllis Schlafly. And so from Eagle Forum, I understand. I wasn't aware of that. When that issue came up last year, but it was brought to my attention. And so I recognize that the only way you could, if it's possible, and I'm not sure that it is, but the only way you could have a constitutional convention is if it was strictly limited to the issue of taking up a balanced budget amendment, which I don't believe that it is. There's some legal opinions out there that say it might be, but knowing the threat after being educated on it, I would tell you that I don't support a constitutional convention. And listen, I'm not perfect. I recognize that you might disagree with a vote that I've taken here or there. But one thing is if you give me information, I'm not opposed to saying, oh, I made a mistake, and here's what I believe. Yes.
There are, I see certain things happening, because of regulations of certain departments within the government, the federal government, such as the regulations and like, it's not the Department of Interior, but the Fish and Wildlife and Game and everything, and what their plans are for the center of our state. And this is going on throughout the United States, where they're making conservancies of the land and bringing it under these different departments of the federal government. Can you see any way that type of thing can be stopped? The 10th Amendment, maybe?
I'm going to have to apologize to you because I'm not quite sure exactly the issue that you're talking about. So,
Sustainability.
if you're talking about Agenda 21, I am very well aware of Agenda 21, and let me just say, I have a much different view of the 21st century, and it doesn't include George Soros. It's that movement that's behind those initiatives. So many of them have already been implemented into our society, and I recognize that. But what I think we need to do a better job of, and it doesn't happen much in Tallahassee because because the legislature in Tallahassee is a part-time legislature, but it has to happen more in Washington, and it's this. There has to be better congressional oversight over administrative agencies. And right now what you're seeing in Washington is the fact that even after the Obama administration, even after they lost the 2010 election, and they heard the message loud and clear, they are still trying to accomplish their leftist agenda through backdoor regulatory measures, through the Environmental Protection Agency, trying to have a regulation of greenhouse gas emissions through the EPA. They're trying to accomplish the same types of goals for their big union buddies, the pro-labor forces, through the National Labor Relations Board. They're trying to control the internet through the Federal Communications Commission. Republicans need to do a better job of congressional oversight, and that would include other regulatory and federal agencies.
Salazar right now
Interior.
is that's right, and he has a big plan for the center of the state of Florida.
I'm not aware of that, so I'm going to have to educate myself on that. Yes, sir.
I was very heartened to hear some of your statements about social conservatism.
Yes.
Because from what I've seen, as we sent Republicans, well, it was 1994. I was there punching chads down in Broward County in 1994, and it worked fine for me. And we sent the freshman class of hard-fired Republicans to Congress, and then they turned into Democrat lights. And I'm hoping it doesn't happen again, because what I've seen with CPAC this year, when it came to social conservative issues, particularly, I served in the Marine Corps, and I feel very strongly about it. We're wrong. I feel very strongly about this repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. More specifically, Section 654 of the U.S. military code, not military code, the U.S. code. If people knew the truth behind what was going on with homosexuality and what that will do to the military cohesiveness, effectiveness, morale, and basically the national security, right? That needs to be stopped and rolled back. And before that, they even had something on called the Matthew Shepard Protection Act. Matthew Shepard Anti-Hate Act, over 570 these psychological deviancies. In other words, people who, well, I'm not even going to say it in polite company, are now under federal protection.
Sure.
These are deviants who are now protected. That needs to be rolled back.
Thank you for bringing up this issue. I'm already on record, and as I told you, my message is the same everywhere I go, is that I did not support the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I share your concerns. I have not served in the military, but I share your concerns as it relates to what impacts it can have on our military's mission and purpose. And so going back to CPAC, though, and going back to those groups, there has been an infiltration of the conservative movement by several different groups out there. And it's not just the groups that I think we're talking about as it relates to social issues. There has also been an infiltration of the conservative movement by stealth jihadists in this country. And that is something that I think we all need to understand and recognize, that just like the same people who tried to bring radical Muslims to the White House after 9/11 to say that Islam is a religion of peace, we are facing that same challenge as it relates to the infiltration of the conservative movement in this country. Yes, ma'am.
Well, can you explain why Congress doesn't have some type of oversight right now? We hear a person that's running, and you're talking exactly what you would think they would be up there right now screaming about. We don't hear one peep.
Exactly.
No one. What is wrong with them?
Well, what are they really afraid of? What is their major fear?
The Republicans in the House, and remember, we don't control, right now, Republicans don't control the Senate. Republicans in the House, I believe, are missing a tremendous opportunity to be on offense and to be aggressive on these issues.
Yes, absolutely.
Here's what I envision to be the problem. What I envision to be the problem is that when you are dealing with these issues, sometimes people want to be more popular, they want to be more liked, and so it gets them to back down from some of those views, and they're not being as aggressive. There are a lot, though. We can't make a blanket statement that it's everybody. There are some who are up there who I think are fighting the fight and who are being aggressive and who are being on offense.
Yes.
And the minute they do that, the mainstream media and others starts to marginalize them and starts to attack them. You have to be fearless.
Yeah.
And what I'm telling you is as a pro-life, pro-gun, anti-jihad, Jewish conservative from Palm Beach County, I've seen everything that they can throw at me. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of the challenges that we have to face right now. And so that's why I'm running, because if there were a strong voice already in this race, I wouldn't have run. And I just didn't see that. And I just felt that after my term limits in the state legislature, that I was perfectly happy transitioning back into private life. But the problem then is who was going to fight? And I'm a fighter, and that's why I'm out here every single day talking to people like you as I travel the state of Florida. Yes, sir.
You've spoken very passionately about some of the things that you want to do and don't want to do. Could you tell our group why it is in your stump speech tonight that you have not provided specifics on how you cut the spending or specifics about how to secure the border?
Sure, and I think there will be plenty of time for those conversations, and I think as it develops and as I'm able to put things on my website and get further into detail. Sometimes people don't want to hear a college lecture when I come out and talk, but I think first and foremost, everything needs to be on the table as it relates to spending cuts, and that includes military spending as well. And that's something in the Ryan budget that I don't think that they address. The other issue is in terms of rolling back spending. Do I have a specific number tonight? I don't, but what I can tell you is that as part of the balanced budget that I've been fighting for and talking about for over the past year, I think that we are going to have to address the major part of our spending, which is entitlement reform. And only in Washington, D.C. can an increase in spending at a lower rate than what was anticipated be considered a cut. Okay? And so we're going to have to be, quite frankly, we're going to have to go and tell the American people the truth that we are not going to be able to sustain the same Medicare entitlements and Medicaid entitlement programs that currently exist. And that's not going to be, as I said, very popular. But it's following those same areas to cut. Medicare and Medicaid, putting defense on the table, discretionary defense, non-discretionary domestic spending, and then finally, these are the easy things that I think is part of the devolution of power back from the federal government to the states. Department of Energy, Department of Education, and taking the power back to the states as part of that process. But until you attack the entitlement side, you can't really make the types of spending cuts that you need to make, and that's where the real specifics and the real where the real amount of cuts are going to be. And I look forward to being able to roll those out over time as to what a Hasner budget would look like in the United States Senate, or the types of things that I'm looking forward to supporting. But right now, I think it's talking about the issues that we have to attack in terms of spending, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security.
Get 2 more questions from the audience. Gentleman in the back.
Okay, yes, sir.
Thank you for coming tonight. But I don't believe, and if I'm wrong, please raise your hand. I don't believe anybody in here was considering voting for Bill Nelson. Yeah. What I wanted to hear about is why are you different from Herodotus?
Sure.
As far as I'm concerned, is a lying traitor.
Okay.
You know, I do not like that man. I have personal experience with him, and he has lied on so many fronts with us, and he can stand up at the Tea Party meetings in Orlando and other places and spout the same exact thing. I want to know, sir, excuse me for being a little upset, but I don't like the guy.
Sure.
Tell me why you're different than Mr. Herodotus, because that's who you have to be.
Sure, and let me say this though too. I don't think that Mike will say the same things that I say. I don't think that Mike is going to be a strong voice on national security issues, on the threats of radical Islam. So I just want to say that because I've heard him speak, and I think that it's very limited in terms of what his message is. Having said that, let me tell you that I don't need to reinvent myself in 2012. I have demonstrated over an 8-year period that my voting record is a conservative voting record. I did not support a cigarette tax. I did not support red light or cameras in red lights. I did not support a prescription drug database program. So I also supported, those are things I didn't support that I think differentiate us. I think the other side is back in 2007, I was one of the strongest proponents of eliminating property taxes as part of, if you remember, Marco Rubio had advanced a plan to eliminate property taxes and replace it with a consumption-based sales tax. And I was one of the strongest supporters of that program, and Senator Herodotus at the time opposed it. Those are specific issues, but when I think it comes back to the bigger picture again, I think what's important to understand is that after 2010, it's easy to take some of these positions and stances. If you go and look at the challenges that I was taking on before 2010, I think you'll realize exactly what I was telling you, is that I am a fighter, someone who, even when it's not easy, even when it's not popular, believes these things. I don't just arrive at my conservative principles because I woke up one day and said, oh, this is going to be cool. It would have been, quite honestly, a lot easier for me, being from my background and being from where I'm from, not just to be a moderate Republican, to be a Democrat. Probably would have had a much easier time from Palm Beach County. But when it comes from your gut, when it comes from your heart, I think it's a lot easier to be able to espouse them. And they're not just talking points. They're not just something that you're able to just throw out. And so from my perspective, when you look back at the fact that I was taking on the big labor in 2008, 2009 on card check, and maintaining the right to a secret ballot, when I was taking on the teachers' unions back in 2005 and 2006. I think those are examples of my demonstration of not having to reinvent myself in 2012. Like a lot of people, I talked earlier about those in the Charlie Crist camp of the Republican Party. Who else was standing up to Charlie Crist? Who else was fighting against them? Who was with, when Marco Rubio announced for the United States Senate in 2009, I was one of the first supporters of Marco Rubio. So I think it goes back to not having to reinvent yourself. And yes, over time, we're going to be able to show a contrast and a distinction on our voting records. And I think you make a great point. Yes, we're all going to vote against Bill Nelson, but I'll conclude with this. Because of where I'm from, because of some of the unique advantages that I have of running in a district that voted for Kerry and voted for Obama, representing Palm Beach and Broward County, I know how to win down there, and I'm the only conservative who can win in November 2012. And don't just listen to me say it. Mark Levin, the radio talk show host, has endorsed me. Eric Erickson of redstate.com has endorsed me. Monica Crowley, Fox News and contributor, has endorsed me. It's because they recognize that right now the DNC is afraid of one person in the Republican primary. They're afraid of me because I don't have baggage, because I am a Jewish conservative that can cut into the Broward and Palm Beach vote that they rely on so heavily, and I'm somebody that they know can go out and articulate our message in a way that's not only going to get the base and the people in this room excited, but I'm going to be able to attract independent voters without ever having to compromise on our principles.
All right, that's great. Okay, we're gonna. Yeah, this is and actually, you know, we had a lightning round of 20 questions put together, but you've already addressed most of them. So it's gonna be a lot easier for you. Adam graciously agreed
for Frank's question.
Yeah, well, a lot of these Frank's probably, you know, partially responsible for at least. But anyway, he graciously agreed to answer some yes or no questions or some either or questions. And it was going to be a lightning round with 20 questions, but we're down to just a few, but they're important ones. So, number one, if elected to the Senate, would you support Senator Jim DeMint's term limits for all constitutional amendment?
My wife is going to be so mad at me for not mentioning that. Yes, you
All
know
right.
that.
Okay.
But can I just say, can I add? Whether the term limits passes in the Constitution or not, I pledge personally to you and to Florida to only serve 2 terms in the United States Senate no matter what.
Right. Okay, number 2, do you oppose all federal gun control legislation to include the ban on assault weapons?
Yes.
All right. Number 3, do you support the repeal of federal drug laws?
What is that? Is that like marijuana legalization? No, I do not support repeal.
Okay. Do you support overturning Roe versus Wade?
Yes.
Okay. Do you support a federal minimum wage law?
Somebody asked me that one the other night. Currently, I do, but I also recognize that Richard Nixon was the one who put that in there, so I'd like to revisit that issue.
All right. Here's a good one. Would you have voted for or against reauthorization of the Patriot Act?
I would have voted for it. Okay. I told you I'm not perfect, right?
Do you categorize the practice of waterboarding prisoners as torture?
No.
Okay. If elected to the Senate, would you support the legislation that mandated a national ID card?
No.
All right. And would you support the ability of Americans to opt out of Social Security?
Yes. If there was
as part of a bigger entitlement
exactly,
reform.
yes.
Okay. And obviously, you would support a balanced budget amendment. Would you support a line item veto for the president?
Yes.
And do you believe a state has the right to secede from the union?
No.
Okay. And let's see, would you have supported the $750 billion bailout proposed by President Bush in 2008? Great, thank you very much for participating. Adam Hansen, everybody give him a big round of applause.